باسم الجمعية العامة يشرفني.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, President of the Republic of Ghana, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is with a heavy heart that I address you today. Just before I left Ghana to attend this assembly, I learned of the terrorist attack that took place in Nairobi, Kenya. I was shocked and deeply saddened to hear of the many lives that were lost to those senseless and cowardly acts of violence. As the death toll increased, so too did my grief, knowing that each additional number symbolized one more human life. Those numbers symbolize individuals who may have been strangers to you or to me, but were of prime significance in the lives of the people who loved them, their parents, their children, their husbands, their wives, their friends, and their colleagues. Soon enough, I got word that one of the people massacred was a person who held significance in my life and in the lives of so many other Ghanaians. Kofi Awuno, a 78-year-old gentleman who had served his country loyally as a distinguished poet and professor, a former ambassador to Brazil and Cuba, and past chairman of our Council of States, a presidential advisory body. Professor Awuno had once even been our country's envoy to the United Nations. On this fateful day, however, Professor Awuno was in Nairobi to perform his poetry at a writers' conference. He had traveled there with his son, and they had decided before the day's schedule began to do what should have been one of the most ordinary and uneventful activities, to make a stop at the shopping mall. Unfortunately, what happened that day at the Westgate's premier shopping mall was anything but ordinary. Professor Awuno's life was taken away from him and those who loved him, just as the lives of dozens of others were taken away from them and their communities, each person with a unique story and with accomplishments or aspirations for which they will be remembered. Professor Awuno's son, though injured, was among the many who were lucky enough to escape the attack. It is a day they will never forget. They will carry the scars, physical and emotional, with them. And we who watch from a distance should never allow ourselves to forget, because we have also been irrevocably marked by this tragedy. Mr. President, when independence was upon us and our possibilities felt endless, the world saw how brightly Africa could shine. Then for decades, that light was dimmed. There was a time when killing seemed almost commonplace in Africa. Indeed, there are still plenty of graves that remain unmarked. There was a time when the ruthlessness of dictators seemed to be the order of the day. For decades, the corruption, the greed, and the depravity of a few caused the suffering of an entire continent. We so easily could have succumbed to the wars, the poverty, the diseases, but we did not. We staggered our way through year after year, and eventually we've made it. We have survived. Mr. President, last year when I addressed this August Assembly, I began with the assurance that I had come with good news from Ghana, the stories of success from the African continent. This year it gives me great pleasure to do the same, even on the heels of this dastardly terrorist attack, because I know that today's Africa will not be divided or deterred by the heinous crimes of those who wish to disrupt our progress. I know that our borders will no longer be used to undermine the brotherhood and sisterhood of our citizens. The days of massacres must remain in our past. Our rivers will no longer run red. Our children must be students now, We will no longer allow their childhoods to be stolen from them by those who wish to turn them into soldiers. Africa is standing tall, walking confidently towards political stability, walking confidently towards economic prosperity, walking proudly towards ethnic and religious harmony and coexistence. There is no place in today's Africa for hatred and intolerance and the murder of innocent people. Not anymore. Not ever again. So we will mourn our dead, we will console ourselves and each other through our grief. We cannot allow terror to defeat us. This must strengthen our resolve. Our stride will not be broken. Mr. President, last year on this stage, I also declared Ghana's resolve to be a beacon of peace and democracy in the West African sub-region. On behalf of the citizens whom I serve, I promise the world that Ghana would not allow its territory to be used in any manner whatsoever to destabilize other nations. Ghana has been steadfast in our cooperation with our regional neighbors to maintain the security of those nations that are enjoying stability and to restore security to those such as Côte d'Ivoire and Mali that have recently emerged from turmoil. Currently, Côte d'Ivoire is in a stage of rebuilding. The recent overtures towards reconciliation made by President Ouattara are a major step towards bridging the country's political divide. After its own bout with terror, Mali made a solid return to democracy by conducting an election that all observers, even the skeptics and the cynics, hailed as being free, fair, and peaceful. West Africa has seen enough war and strife. We want peace and security to persist in our sub-region. Ghana will continue to play its role in strengthening the economic community of West African states to make sure that it is able to meet this objective. Mr. President, with all that I have mentioned in this address, I'm sure it would not come as a surprise to anyone that Ghana enthusiastically threw its support behind the Arms Trade Treaty just adopted by the UN General Assembly. International trade in conventional arms and ammunition must be regulated. We like to make mention of how the world has become a global village, especially when speaking of technology, culture, and travel. The facility of that global village also exists for warmongers and terrorist groups as well. They are using it to recruit new members, to expand their cells, to create intercontinental networks, to obtain weapons and conceal their identities as well as their locations. If we are to fight back, we must also work cooperatively. Nations in the developed world must align themselves with nations in the developing world. We must form partnerships and work together. Ghana is prepared to do this. We've signed the Arms Trade Treaty and we intend to do everything possible to see that it is ratified in a timely manner. Mr. President, fledgling democracies tend to be fragile. Their limits are still being tested, their characteristics are still being defined. Democracy is not a one-size-fits-all venture, nor is it a one-time event. It is a system that takes decades to build, a process that pushes you towards a perfection you will never reach, but must continue trying nonetheless. This past year, the limits of Ghana's democracy were tested, and I'm proud to report that we passed with flying colors. The results of our recent elections were contested. Since our return to constitutional rule, Ghana has conducted 6 successive elections. These were the first results to be formally challenged and heard by the Supreme Court. What made this situation noteworthy was the reliance by all parties involved on the rule of law. The proceedings were televised for the sake of transparency. The verdicts were readily accepted, and there was not a single reported incident of violence. Ghana's victory is not an aberration. Other countries like Kenya have shared similar experiences. This indicates that the democratic institutions in Africa are growing stronger. It indicates that the balance of power in African countries is shifting from the authority of a sole individual to the more equitable process of properly designed systems. Strong institutions are the hallmark of every nation's stability. They are crucial tools in the fight for human rights. Mr. President, it is our intention to bring an end to youth unemployment. In Ghana today, we are about to launch the Youth Jobs and Enterprise Development Fund, a program that will provide young people with entrepreneurial skills and access to the funds needed to establish businesses of their own or expand existing ones, thereby creating new employment opportunities for themselves. 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world today are on the African continent. However, this growth has not yet translated into sustainable employment opportunities. Over the course of the last decade, African economies created over 37 million wage-paying jobs, yet 63% of workers remain trapped in low-paying subsistence or self-employment endeavors. With these realities come the very real possibilities of income instability, exclusion from the benefits of economic growth, and social security benefits tied to formal sector employment. Africa has a fast-growing population, more than 50% of which is below the age of 35. That means we must create more jobs for our growing numbers of youth. They must have opportunities available to them. We cannot do this unless we transform the economies of Africa. It all comes down to value. We must value our resources, including our human resource. We must value our people. We cannot continue to be the exporters of raw material and primary produce. We need to add value to our exports. We cannot continue to export raw cocoa beans in Ghana. What we need to do instead is process more of these beans into value-added products. We cannot continue to export unrefined gold. We need to add value to our gold exports. We cannot continue to export oil and gas. We need to integrate that industry into our economy. We need to process petroleum products and produce power with the gas. We cannot continue to export bauxite and then in return import alumina to feed our local aluminium smelter. We need to work towards creating an integrated bauxite and aluminium industry in Ghana. In this way, by keeping the concept of value at the forefront of our economy, we can create new jobs for our young people. We can do this with local and foreign investors who share our vision. Often the rest of the world wrongly assumes that we in Africa do not know our worth. We do. It's not sympathy we want, it's partnership, the ability to stand on our own feet. It's not handouts we're in search of, it's opportunities. We've already shown with time and the right opportunity, Africa can make it. Mr. President, Ghana achieved the Millennium Development Goal targets for reducing poverty and hunger far ahead of the scheduled date of 2015. We're on track to achieving MDGs 2, 3, and 6 as well. School enrollment, gender parity, and the reduction of HIV/AIDS have all seen dramatic progress and statistical shifts as a result of the work that has been done to reach our targets. While we're lagging behind in MDGs 4, 5, and 7, infant mortality and maternal mortality as well as sanitation, the figures show that there has been a vast improvement. Since 2000, the number of maternal deaths for every 100,000 births has decreased by more than half, from 740 to 320. We recognize that when you're talking about human lives, even a 50% decrease is too little. It's not enough. That is why in 2010 we launched the MDG Accelerated Framework and Action Plan. Women account for more than 50% of Ghana's population. We believe that empowering them through education and encouraging them to take full control of their reproductive rights will not only help us realize our MDG goals faster, it would help us build a better nation. It is not enough to put girls in school and allow them just enough education to be deemed literate. We must keep them in school. Removing teen girls from school for any reason, let alone to marry them off, is an unacceptable practice that must end. African women have always been the backbone of our society. Imagine the change they could effect in our countries if only we'd help them reach their full potential. As a president and as a father, I owe it to my children, my sons and my daughter, and all the children of Ghana, to create for them a country where they will walk with their dignity intact and their heads held high, and stand shoulder to shoulder with the children of Europe, South America, Asia, North America, and indeed the rest of the world. Mr. President, Ghana is encouraged by the new initiative to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian issue. We are still firm in our belief that an independent Palestinian state existing side by side with a peaceful and secure Israeli state is a desirable outcome we must all support and work towards. In working towards this, we must realize that the continuous construction of settlements in Palestinian territory increasingly shuts the door on a two-state solution. Ghana calls once again for the embargo against Cuba to be lifted. It is a relic of the Cold War era and has no place in our current global dispensation. We've come a long way since the end of the last global war, and yet the makeup of this august institution, the UN Security Council, is not a reflection of that development. Ghana therefore supports a reform of the UN Security Council. Ghana will continue to pursue the principle of constructive engagement in our relationships with other countries of the world. We're fully committed to promoting honest global partnership that is informed by mutual respect and reciprocity. In closing, I would like once again to pay my respects to those who have lost their lives in Kenya, in Syria, in Palestine, in Egypt, in Libya, in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Nigeria, in Mali, in Somalia, in Turkey, in India, in the United States, and all the other places where terrorists have attacked in this year alone. The reason we are all gathered here today is to find the ways and the means to create a better, more peaceful and prosperous world. I thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity given me.
باسم الجمعية العامة أود أن أشكر رئيس جمهورية غانا على
On behalf of the General Assembly, I would like to thank the President of Ghana for his statement. May I ask the representatives to remain seated while I